Communists must be more focused and extreme than libertarians in eradicating the state. In a rather audacious but novel olive branch to libertarians, the Communist JU has proposed, communists and libertarians should work together to kill Social Security. Now, I'll let you read why on your own, and you can do so in the link to the Substack in the description. However, this stemmed from a previous Substack post, boldly titled, Shock Therapy for the New Deal. Communists need a plan to actually defund government. In it, JU suggests nothing short of unraveling the New Deal and everything that came with it. Eliminate the welfare state entirely, including Social Security and Medicare. Eliminate the national security state, including almost all of the military. Return to the gold standard, including elimination of the Federal Reserve Bank. Return to a balanced budget and eliminate the national debt. Withdraw from NATO and all other such treaties. Withdraw all American military forces from overseas. Briefly, the goal of such an unwinding is not to go backwards per se, but to recognize this outgrowth of the public sector as nothing more than utterly parasitic and cancerous-like growth of a state that is meant to keep capital on life support and to do so off the backs of the social producers. Whereas shock therapy has historically been used to punish the social producers in restructuring any economy it's ever been applied to, this sort of liberalization is meant to unshackle them and shift the burden directly to the fascist state and to those domestic and global benefactors of the fiction of its outgrowth in the form of debt and deficits. This is something the Libertarian Party itself has all but advocated for, although I do not pretend that they are match perfect, but close enough to the spirit of clawing back the New Deal. From their website. Libertarians would phase out the current government-sponsored Social Security system and transition to a private voluntary system. We call for the repeal of the income tax, the abolishment of the Internal Revenue Service, and all federal programs and services not required under the U.S. Constitution. Intelligence agencies that legitimately seek to preserve the security of the nation must be subject to oversight and transparency. We favor free market banking with unrestricted competition among banks and depository institutions of all types. We support a halt to inflationary monetary policies and unconstitutional legal tender laws. And as an aside here, this would necessitate the end of centralized banking and its practices thereof. In order to halt inflationary policies, this would also require some return to the gold standards, as was the case before the gold standard collapsed, when the average yearly inflation was 0.1%. Which is basically zero. Government should not incur debt which burdens future generations without their consent. We support the passage of a balanced budget amendment to the U.S. Constitution, provided the budget is balanced exclusively by cutting expenditures and not by raising taxes. The United States should both avoid entangling alliances and abandon its attempts to act as policemen for the world. American foreign policy should emphasize peace with all nations, entangling alliances with none. We would end the current U.S. government policies of foreign interventions, including military and economic aid, tariffs, economic sanctions, and regime change. Sounds eerily similar, no? This is all coupled with the fact that the Libertarian Party had significantly been growing, up 92% according to Ballot Access News as of 2018, but did see a dip in the highly contentious and supposed high-stakes national election of 2020. Communists can't ignore this, given the amount of overlap between our aims, but also our displacement as the most radical and extreme group in the United States over the past century. The average communist in America is closer to that of Bernie Sanders or AOC or Cornel West, and this simply won't do. They have fetishized the state. They are moderates compared to someone like Ron Paul. Our demands, our explicit aims, should make Ron Paul appear to be your average liberal soccer mom in the California suburbs by comparison. We must go deeper and further in our hatred of the state than even the libertarians are comfortable with, who are basically state minimalists who only see it as a conduit to protect the only measly little bit of property they actually own in the form of their increasingly redundant labor power. But the reason communists should be hyper-focused on the state as a matter of self-discipline, it is because it has more profound downstream effects than immediate automation of the service sector, or its anachronistic opposite, unionizing them all. Besides the 20 to 25 million employees of the government, there are the private companies that directly do business with the state. Defense, energy, healthcare, insurance, pharmaceuticals, e-commerce, and yes, even the service industry. In other words, should we reduce 2/5 of the public sector, it is quite possible that these industries that previously relied on the bottomless slop trough of federal dollars would actually have to adjust in kind anyways. Which means a reducing of their own work weeks, i.e. confining labor time in accordance to the limit commodity money necessarily restricts it to, and automation through intensive capital investment. Furthermore, it would incentivize divestment from the public sector itself, as the faucet of the world's surplus that flows into Washington can no longer be converted into risk-free dividends for all kinds of wasteful endeavors, reversing the greatest transfer of wealth in human history vis-a-vis the excess capital to Treasury Department to bourgeoisie pipeline. And yet, this is only the first step. In order to be more ruthless and extreme than the Libertarians, a 40% decrease in federal government is only the anesthetic. The next step is to administer a paralytic, or, as Libertarian candidate for president Mike Termott has recently said, if you want to get rid of a government agency, you have to make it irrelevant. In fact, the exchange of free time for the repeal of the New Deal, i.e., the conversion of the superfluous state into a shortened work week, is also time we desperately require, as people with real needs, to figure out how to make the state as redundant as the very labor it exploits in order to assert itself as necessary. The final step, naturally then, is a lethal dose to stop the heart and kill the state altogether. This ultimately is the natural difference between communists and libertarians. Whereas they want some semblance of a state because they believe that behind decentralization is the conditions for good governance and a return to the classical capitalist pre-New Deal social and production relations, we communists know that there is nothing behind the state's demise besides the free association of individuals engaging in self-activity atop a mountain of free time for all. It is thus in our interest to not only engage with libertarians, it is in our interest to out-libertarian them, to be the most radically intrepid group in the United States where it is unmistakable to the public who we are and what we stand for. A final reckoning for the fascist state, proponents for the complete defunding of the single most corrupt and violent enterprise that has ever been organized in human history, and the undertakers for the pathetic social programs the state has conditioned us to believing we need, as they use them as cheap bargaining tools to steal the prime of our lives for an empty pot of gold at the end of a life spent slaving away for them and their largesse.